Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a wrap up of all the books I read in January, first month of the year. I feel so good about this month. I feel like I've started off the year on a great foot, read a lot of great books this month, a lot of new stuff from new authors, and trying to keep going outside of my comfort zone. So let's get into it. This video is going to be so long if I don't be very brief, so we're going to try to keep this video as short as possible. So the first book I read was The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is a nonfiction book. It is a series of 3 essays. The first one is about the author's experience traveling to Africa for the first time, and the second is about his experience watching a attempted book banning at a school, one of his books, and then the third is his experience going to Palestine for the first time. And I found this to be a really well-written and yet still very accessible book. His writing style is very unique and very beautiful, but also very easy to read. I was surprised at how well all 3 of the stories came together. At first it kind of felt like they were all kind of doing their own thing, but then they came together really nicely at the end. So I thought this was just a great book, a great start to my reading year. Then I read The Hammer by Hamilton Nolan. This is a book about kind of the present state of labor organization in the United States. I'll give you a hint, it's not great. The United States is very hostile to unions and to labor organizing, but there are still people fighting the good fight for unions and for greater labor organization, and that's what this book is about. I found it to be really interesting, really inspiring, very realistic about the struggles we face organizing in America, but also very hopeful that things can change. And I found this to be, it had me Googling my place, location, my job title, union. So that shows you how inspired it got me. Then I read Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer. This was published 10 years after the original trilogy came out. It is the 4th book in the Southern Reach series. I was very hesitant to pick this one up because it can be really hit or miss. A book published 10 years after the original series was published can be really hit or miss. For example, I really love Ursula K. Le Guin's additions to the Earthsea series, and I don't consider the series complete without them, but I hated the additions to the Gracelink series. I hated Winterkeep despite loving the original series, so it can be really hit or miss. It can either be a really worthwhile continuation of the series or a total nostalgia bait cash grab, and I am very pleased to announce that Absolution is a very worthy addition to the series. If you like the first 3 books, I think you will definitely like this one. It is, again, comprised of 3 shorter stories. The first one is about a pre-Area X expedition into the area that would become Area X. A bunch of biologists go there, but at the same time, Central is kind of using them to test out hypnosis and hypnotic commands, and we learn about this through the kind of framing narrative of the protagonist narrator of the second short story, Old Jim, going over the case files, the kind of reports from that expedition. And the second short story is about Old Jim and how he is a deep cover Central operative, and him going to, again, the place that would become Area X and being put through his own mission by Central and kind of the realizations that he comes to. The second one reminded me a lot of all the best parts of Authority. I'm in the minority. I like Authority. I know a lot of people dislike the second book in the series a lot, but I love it. I love all the spy stuff, all the political stuff, all the hypnosis stuff, and the second story in this collection very much felt like all the best parts of Authority without any of kind of the weaker setup parts of Authority. And then the third book is the kind of recounting of the original first expedition into Area X with Lowry as our protagonist. It can be quite hard to read at first because Lowry literally has a tic that makes him say curse words every other word pretty much, but that gimmick kind of drops out and then comes back, and it actually adds a lot to his character, I found, and you stop noticing after a little bit. Your eyes just kind of skip right over it, so I didn't mind that, but I know a lot of people had problems with that. But I found Lowry to be a really interesting character, and kind of the way that the last story in this sets up so much and just like really reorients what you thought about the other 2 stories in this, and the way they all kind of layer on top of each other in a way that I didn't expect and really enjoyed. I really enjoyed this one. It gave me the same buzz that reading the original series made me feel, and I totally recommend. Plus, it's just a beautiful book. I love these new covers. I love the little the little words on it. It's beautiful. Anyways, and then I read The Edge of Worlds by Martha Wells. This is the 4th book in the Books of the Raxura series, and it's the penultimate book, second to last. This was one of the I don't want to say the weaker ones in the series. It's weird. I feel so conflicted about a lot of these books despite loving them. This book is a lot of setup. The first half of this book really drags. And it took me so long to read it, all the setup, but the further you get into the story and the more the plot actually does kick in, the more interesting it gets. It is a little bit different from the rest of the plots in the series, which I found to be getting pretty repetitive. It's like it's really, when you think about it, kind of the same basic format of the Rexor are trying to stop the Fel from getting an artifact that they shouldn't have, but the kind of flavor is very different, and so it did feel unique in that way. And then it ends on this great cliffhanger. And this book is probably gayer than the first 3 books combined, which I did enjoy. You could really tell that Martha Wells just stopped caring about whether people cared about the fact that the Rexor are all bisexual and polyamorous in this book, and I did like that. And then I read Bunny by Mona Awad. This one reminded me a lot of a book we'll get to later. I really struggle with how I feel about this book. I really liked how weird it was. I liked a lot of the stuff in the beginning, but then I just didn't think it came together thematically in the end. You have these kind of 2 themes that don't seem to gel well together when they should. They feel like they should gel very well together. It's like you've got the narrator's loneliness, and then you've got her disgust at yet desire to be accepted by the kind of privileged peers at this school she's going to. And it feels like those themes should go together very well, right? Like she wants to be accepted by them because she is lonely, but they just diverge very sharply at a certain point and never come back together in a way I found satisfying. And the end of the book kind of ends up being all about this twist that is very obvious, that I guess from literally the first second this character appears on page, and it makes kind of the thing you come away with about this story the questions about like the main character's sanity basically, and not about those themes of academia, privilege, loneliness, stuff like that. So I liked this. I just thought it needed to be cooked a little longer. I would read more by Mona Awad. I have a friend who really likes her stuff, so I might give her another try. And then let's just get all of them out of the way now. Next I read the Captive Prince series by C.S. Picot. This was quite popular on Tumblr in like 2014 to 2016, around the same time that All for the Game was popular. I was an All for the Game head. I loved that series. I still do. I still actually think it holds up pretty well. Not great, but I will defend that series until my dying breath. It is not bad. It is good, and I like it. Every time I reread it, I expect it to be bad this time, and it never is. So I love that series, and they have a big overlap in fan bases. I think literally for the sole reason that they were both books that were self-published and had a gay romance as the kind of center of the story. But anyways, I never got into it. I read I think the first book and it was just too sexual for me at the time. I was like 14. But I had a friend who was really into them, and she really wanted me to read them and just give my opinion and see what I thought about them, and so I did. These books have such high ratings on Storygraph, and I don't understand it. I am perfectly willing to say that I think my lack of nostalgia definitely is a factor here, and kind of the way I can't just turn my brain off and enjoy this series because of a lot of the stuff it tries to do. I could make a whole like 40-minute video talking about the Captive Prince series, but what I'm just gonna say is I don't think it works as a kind of political drama because the main villain of this series never even gets a name. He is simply referred to as the uncle slash the regent in all 3 books, even in like the list of characters at the front of the last book, which I thought was really funny. And then you could tell the author just didn't want to write battles at a certain point, so they just go to a location where nobody's allowed to fight and fix everything there, which I thought was funny. And then I also didn't really think this worked as a romance because the relationship just starts out so fraught and so cruel in the first book, and then in the second book, when the author needs them to start liking each other and get together, it really just feels like both of their personalities flip on a dime, and all of a sudden they're super into each other, and I just didn't really buy it. But the thing that really ruined this series for me was the slavery. It's just a really weird dynamic, really weird time, really weird racial politics in this one, and it really just flavored a lot of what I thought while I was reading. And there is kind of a last minute kind of 11th hour attempt to fix that. Like they do end up swearing to that they will abolish slavery in like the last 10% of the last book, but it didn't feel earned to me, and I just didn't believe in the character arc, the journey that I think the author was trying to have Damon go through. It just didn't feel realistic. It didn't feel earned. So that really impacted my enjoyment of the series. Yeah, I could talk for literally 40 minutes about this one, so let's just stop it there. And then I read You Should Be So Lucky by Cat Sebastian. This is the second book in their kind of queer historical romance series. The first one is We Could Be So Good, I think it's called. I enjoyed that one, but I was really frustrated at the fact that there's a serious misreading of Mary Reynolds' The Charioteer in that book. I don't believe Cat Sebastian has ever read The Charioteer because it is just used in such a weird way in that book, like in a way that is diametrically opposed to what the actual themes of The Charioteer are, but this is not about that book and not about The Charioteer. You Should Be So Lucky was a weird experience because I liked the characters more than I liked the characters from the first book, and I thought it was doing a lot of really interesting stuff with like grief recovery and stuff like that, but this book is just too long. It starts to really sag under its own weight in the middle, especially because there is no kind of external conflict, external plot through line that we're following. And I really do respect and understand why Cat Sebastian wants to write very fluffy historical romances and like have them have not a lot of conflict and have very happy endings, but conflict is what sustains a story and makes it not boring. And the conflicts that we get in this book are just so internal and they don't hold up the story. They are so internal and they are so character focused that there's kind of not a lot sustaining the story, holding it up in the middle. Like I said, it starts to sag in the middle. Despite liking the characters and thinking that the journeys they were going on were interesting, I just found myself really bored by a lot of this. Both the characters in this one bond over literature as well. They bond over Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House. It's like a one step forward, two steps back kind of situation because it's not egregiously misread in this book, but it's so less skillfully woven through the story as something that these characters bond over. Like, they talk about it at the very beginning of the book, and then it comes back up at the very end as like a kind of throwback, callback, like, oh, our secret, like our little inside joke thing. But it had been so long since it was even mentioned that I had totally forgotten about it. And I was like, what is this teacup he's giving him? Like, what is this? Romance is really hard for me. Specifically, romance book is really hard for me. I need something else. But I wouldn't say I disliked this book. It was just, again, I think it needed conflict. And I don't think Cat Sebastian wants to give it conflict. So it's like just a mismatch of author-reader preferences here. Then I read The Harbors of the Sun by Martha Wells, which is the 5th and final book in the Books of the Rex series. I really enjoyed this one. It was a great end to the series, I think, because you get all the setup done in Edge of Worlds. This book is just go, 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 go. There's so many different plot threads being juggled in a very skillful manner, I thought. We have all these separate groups running around at the beginning of the series, and then they all slowly start to come together, and I found it to be done in a really fun way. I loved Moon and Stone's like road trip at the beginning of this book because those are my two favorite characters, and it was just kind of a nice throwback because like that's how they start the first book too. So I felt like it paralleled each other nicely. The climax of this book is a little confusing just because of like where they are. Like everybody's geographical place is not clear. I didn't understand where people were and how the events of the climax were playing out. And that leads kind of this big miscommunication conflict that lingers on from that to feel quite forced, especially because both of the characters involved kind of just make up on their own even before Moon like gets involved and tries to make them forgive each other. Like they're both literally just like, yeah, I overreacted, sorry. And I'm like, okay, why even have that conflict if you're not going to actually carry it forward and do something interesting with that? But that's my minor gripe. Either way, I really enjoyed this one. I'm sad to say goodbye to this world, but I agree with a lot of other people in like the reviews for this that kind of these character stories are just done. But I would love to see more about the what are they called? The Fell. I would love to see Consolation and Kethel in the future because I thought those were really fun characters, and that was my main gripe about this series before, that I didn't like that the Fell were all just uniformly evil, cackling villains. I wanted more development for them, and that's what I got in this book, so I would love to see more about them. I know it's not going to happen because this book was published in 2017 and there's been nothing since, but Martha Wells, if you're out there, if you're watching this video, I would like to see. You want to just post some short stories on your website? Like for me, like I'll buy them. I'll pay whatever you want. Then I read Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. I'm rereading their own with the Elderling series. Ship of Destiny took me so long to read. I started this one in December and it took me until January 10th. But anyways, I love Ship of Destiny. I think, again, Robin Hobb is juggling so much in this book and it all comes together in a really nice way. Althea's fate is really hit or miss with me. Sometimes I think it's done very well. Sometimes I hate how it's done. So anyways, I think that's why it took me so long to read this one, just because I knew it was coming and like I kind of didn't want to get to it. But overall, I really love Live Ship. I think it is one of my it's so hard to compare and contrast to the Fits series because they're just so different, but I really do love Live Ship. I'll also get all these out of the way too. I finally read the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black. I think I just missed the boat on this one. It just came out a little past when I was young enough to enjoy it. I think I would have liked this if I had read it before I had read A Song of Ice and Fire, because this does feel very much like YA Game of Thrones, not A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, because there's literally a portion in the second book where they play out beat for beat the Cersei Littlefinger power is power scene from the show, which is not in the book. So that was just something I noticed. But anyways, what really killed this trilogy for me is the writing style. I found it to be just like very juvenile and hard to read. The first person present POV is a hard sell for me on a good day, but like Jude's voice is so grating to me. The way that Holly Black has her not use contractions, I think because she thinks it makes her sound like fey and weird and like old-fashioned, but it just didn't work for me. It just made Jude sound so stilted and so awkward. And my favorite book was the second book because it was just a lot of political scheming, which I love. But the first book, I liked the second half of that book because it's a lot of political scheming. But the last book in this series I just did not like because it revolves around not one, but two extremely obvious riddles. You're like, Jude, are you stupid? And then the last book very much felt like just a bunch of random unconnected events that were just happening out of nowhere without any kind of gradual tension build up. Like, why does Garden turn into a fucking snake at the end of this book? So yeah, I just don't think the series is for me. I see a lot of people saying, oh, you know, people just don't like the series because they're sold it as like a romantasy when it's really a political drama. And I'm like, no, I don't think it's that either. So yeah, I think I would have liked this series if it had come out a little earlier and I was a little younger when I read it, but it came out in 2018. I think I was just already too old at that point to really be into it. Especially because this series is just weird because it feels like it was supposed to be published in like 2014 to 2016, not 2018. Like the characters go to the mall, they go to JCPenney. I'm pretty sure Jude is watching Yuri on Ice at one point, but it was just not for me. And I didn't think it was written very well, so I don't know if I would ever check out anything from Holly Black in the future. Sorry, I know this is very beloved, don't kill me. And then I read The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. This is a standalone epic fantasy about kind of playing with the myth of King Arthur. It is about this knight Colum who goes to join up the Knights of the Round Table. It's all he's ever wanted. And when he gets there, he learns that Arthur and basically all of the knights have been killed in this big battle only a few days before, and it's up to Colum and the rest of kind of the dregs, the outcasts of the Round Table, to figure out what is going to happen next, who's going to be king afterwards. This is a really interesting story about nostalgia, about finding your place in the world, about magic versus faith. I really enjoyed this. I'm not a huge Arthurian legend fan. I know very basic stuff about it, as every English major does, and then I watched BBC Merlin, of course, so I know that, but it's not very accurate. But I really enjoy this. I normally don't enjoy quest walking fantasy either, which this book very much is, but because every so often the chapters are interrupted by backstory for each of the various knights, I found that broke up the traveling fantasy in a way that I really enjoyed, and you get so much insight on each of these knights, and it really helps it feel like they're more than just like stock characters for diversity points or whatever. Like there's a gay knight, a trans knight, a knight from the Middle East, and all of that feels well explored and well thought out, and how that would impact their lives and how they're viewed by the others on the Round Table. So I just really enjoy this. I'm probably one of the few people in the world who actually loved the Magician trilogy by Lev Grossman. It was one of my favorite books of last year, and this is like the first thing he's published in like 10 years, so I think it shows a lot of growth from The Magicians, just the amount that he was able to do in one standalone book, even though it is a long ass book. It's like 800 pages, but I really enjoyed it. I hope it doesn't take him 10 more years to publish anything else after this, because I just really love Lev Grossman's writing style. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion. He loves a good comma, and so do I. The last line of this book really gets me. I don't know why I find this line to be so beautiful. Let me read it to you. He looked up at the empty clouds, and as he died he wondered, not for the first time but for the very last, why it should be that we are made for a bright world but live in a dark one. That really got me, especially right now. Like, I don't want to live in a dark world, I want to live in a bright world, but I really enjoyed this. And then I read Measure for Measure by William Shakespeare. It's funny to put a Shakespeare book on your wrap-up, but I did read this. It's a really short one. It's one of his, it's one of his later comedies. A comedy in Shakespeare just means that some characters get married at the end. This one is kind of a black comedy though. It is quite funny, but also very dark. It deals with a lot of social issues that are still really relevant today, like sexual assault and attempted trading for sexual favors, and the validity of sex work as an occupation and the criminalization of sex work. So I thought it was really interesting the way that Shakespeare handled those issues. Although certain characters get off really easy in this book. I don't even know why I read this. I don't think I had ever read it before, and it just was on my shelf, and I was like, my Shakespeare books sit above my computer where I play video games, so every so often when a cutscene's going on way too long, I just pull down Shakespeare and start reading Shakespeare. Man, I sound like a fucking nerd. And then I read Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson. This is, I think, one of her earlier novels, and it is about a young girl whose father is like a very pretentious literary figure, and her mother is like a stressed out housewife. She's not very close to her family, and she is sexually assaulted at one of her father's parties but never tells anyone about it, and then she goes off to a women's college, and it's all about her like coming of age and self-discovery and stuff like that. This felt very similar. This is the book that felt so similar to Bunny by Mona Awad, and I thought I found it to be done a lot better in this book because it's not so strongly leaning on like a twist at the end, like even though kind of almost the same thing happens in this book, but it is a lot more subtle and more well done, I thought. I do think it has kind of a wish fulfillment-y ending. I was reading this article from one of her biographers talking about the ending of this book, and this is one of those books that like makes you Google, is X author a lesbian? Because there's just a lot of stuff in here that's like, Shirley Jackson, were you gay? And that's something that I think suffuses this, and something that her biographer did bring up, that Shirley Jackson clearly had this like intense obsession but also fear with lesbian desires, and you know, the biographer didn't feel confident speculating on it, but I do. No, I'm not gonna. But anyways, I enjoyed that. I have found I've really enjoyed Shirley Jackson's work. Then I read Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. I'm continuing my Run with the Otherlings reread. You can tell I love the Fits in the Fool books because it took me like a month to read Ship of Destiny, and it took me like a week to finish Fool's Errand. Just injected directly into my veins. The reunion between them in this book is so crazy and so wonderful. It like gets me every time. I highlight everything. They love each other so much. Anyways, I'm gonna cry. The plotting of this series is probably the worst, even worse than Farseer. Like so much of this book is just them walking around. But I love it because I love all of the characters involved who are walking around. I haven't started Golden Fool yet because that book is also so plotless and I'm scared of the coral, but I really love these books. I read Women's Work by Elizabeth Wayland Barber. This is a nonfiction book about the history of women and textiles. I found this to be a really interesting read. I have very limited fibercraft knowledge. I can crochet a little, not even that well, but I can. And I found it to be really interesting the way she talked about finding women's history and the way that it's kind of difficult because so much of women's products throughout history have been perishables, food, textiles, but that we do have a history and it can be found, and it's just harder to find, and the importance of kind of reverse engineering this history, of actually weaving the way they would have woven to gain insight into what they do. I thought it was very interesting, a little Eurocentric, and clearly an academic book for an academic audience. Like something like Cultish by Amanda Mantell, I think is her name, is clearly an academic book for a layperson audience. Like anyone can just pick that up and read it, but this one is a little bit more academic and harder to read, but I still thought it was readable. I really enjoyed it. Then I read Foster by Claire Keegan. This was the only one my library had from her, and while the other ones were on hold, I read this one. I thought it was really impressive what Claire Keegan was able to do in like 90-ish pages, and I mean, the books are like this big, like half the size of a normal book, so I'm sure it's only even like 40 pages if we're being real, but I thought it was so impressive what she was able to do, and the way she is able to use negative space and not saying anything to say something is really impressive. However, I did find this one to be just a little too short. It very much leaves you unsatisfied at the end, and I think a large part of that is intentional because it is kind of a story that has no happy ending, but a lot of what made me unsatisfied was the fact that there's all these issues that are just brought up but then not really thoroughly explored or discussed. So I found it to be really impressive, really well done, but it just didn't stick the landing for me personally. Then I read Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. I read The Wager by David Grann and enjoyed it, and so I thought I would pick this one up and then watch the movie. I haven't watched the movie yet, but I found this to be very interesting, if a little obsessed with the FBI. This one feels a lot more true crimey than The Wager, which feels very much like a almost narrative. Like that one is written in a story-like fashion, whereas this one is written in a very short chapters, like choppy, like flipping back and forth, lining up all the timelines, stuff like that. So I'm really interested to see the movie now and see what they did with it. Then I read Moth Eater by Linda H. Kodega. That name sounds mildly familiar to you. You may also have Interview with Vampire Disease. Linda H. Kodega is a journalist who covered Interview with the Vampire News, and they are now working as a writer's assistant on the 3rd season of Interview with the Vampire. I'm a big fan of Interview with the Vampire, and I had read some of Linda Kodega's articles. I think they go by Lynn, actually. I had read some of Lynn Kodega's articles and really enjoyed them. So when I saw this at my local indie bookstore, I was like, I have to get it. I have to see what's going on there. And it did seem very interesting. This book is hard to define what it's about. This is a queer mystery, queer supernatural mystery set in a rural town in Appalachia about a Black woman who is attempting to find out why people are dying at this mining operation in her town. And one day she finds a woman in a river who has been asleep in the mine for 150 years, and she is a witch, and her name is Moth Eater, and Moth Eater and Benny team up and try to figure out what is going on in this town. I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it in the end. It's very messy, and it gets very messy at the end, and the ending is less than satisfying. However, something about it I still really enjoyed. I think it's very vibes heavy, and I really did enjoy the vibes of this, and also the relationship between Benny and Moth Eater is so compelling and intriguing. It's not really a romance heavy story, but the bits that are there, like, it is very much about their relationship and their friendship that grows into something more, and so I really enjoyed that. I liked their dynamic a lot. I think some of the side characters were less than stellarly utilized. I think it's a lot of throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks with a lot of these side characters, and the kind of ultimate message gets a little muddled. But I really enjoy this. There's something so romantic about having to teach your witch girlfriend what a QR code is, and I would definitely read more from this author. We're in the home stretch, and then the last book I read was Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. If I found Foster to be a little too short and a little unsatisfying, Small Things Like These delivered exactly what I wanted it to deliver. It was so excellent, a very, very well-written, potent, well-developed, well-established story. I got everything I wanted out of Small Things Like These. Small Things Like These revolves around a man who finds out that the church in his area is doing something very awful, and about what he does with it. This is a story about complicity and empathy and hypocrisy, and I just found it to be so interesting and so well done. I did know a little bit about Magdalene Laundries going in because I was in a James Joyce class, and one of his short stories is also about Magdalene Laundries, a woman who works in one, I think, but I did know a little bit about the history going in, and it's such a horrible thing that happened, and I thought that the way Keegan dealt with it here was very empathetic and interesting, and using it to say a lot about the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church, and just a great book. Again, she's able to do so much in a very compact 100 pages, so great book to end the month on. So we've come to the end of the month. I'm gonna do a really quick up next look. These are all the books I'm either in the middle of or have out from the library, so I need to finish them. I'm reading The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, a classic. I'm reading The Steerswoman's Road, which was sold to me as fantasy librarians, which it basically is, and I'm really enjoying. This is the first 2 books in this series, and it was the only way I could get these books from the library, so. And then I'm very slowly making my way through Book of the New Sun by Jean Wolfe. This is 4 books in one, technically. I finished the first one. I'm about to start the second one. This is a post-historic sci-fi fantasy set on our world, like a million years in the future as the sun is dimming, and it follows this guy who is part of the Torturers Guild until he's thrown out for showing empathy, and I haven't got much farther than that, but very interesting. I really like the prose, and I like the post-historic concept. And then I am going to continue my Realm of the Elderlings reread, reading Golden Fool. And then I also have out digitally To Winter Nights, which is an anthology short story collection set in the Dragon Age universe pre-Veilguard. I'm curious, I'm nosy, I want to see what's going on there. And that is it. So thank you so much for sitting through this video, watching this video. I tried to keep it short, but it still ended up being like 40 minutes. Oh my god. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you read in January, what you're gonna read in February, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.